Hello and welcome to this episode of Kennedy Saves the World. This is something that I've been looking forward to discussing with two of my best friends. We went on a life-changing trip to Poland, and we were given a very special tour of many of the Holocaust sites. In Poland, we covered so much of the country, and we learned so much. It was really an incredible experience that was made possible by Guy Benson. He joins me now, along with our travel companion, Emily Compagno. Welcome back to the podcast, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Guy, you were the one who coordinated this trip with a group of people that you had visited Israel with. And I said yes immediately because I knew it was going to be a very important trip. And then I had a lot of doubts because I was scared about how heavy it would be. Did you have any of those doubts when you put this whole thing together?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's like, it's not going to be a fun trip. It's not intended to be a fun trip. I wanted to make sure that it would be a group of people that we went with who would be able to get along well, travel well together, have some fun where possible, because I think that's really important, some levity, but also people who would understand the gravity and the magnitude of what we were seeing and who could bring it back to what we do on a daily basis and sort of internalize some of these really gruesome lessons of humanity and history. And so it was the three of us. It was Mary Catherine Ham, it was Molly and Mark Hemingway, and a few others, and including my other half. Dreamboat, as we call him.
Yes,
and the Maccabee Task Force, they were incredibly generous to help put this all together. They were the ones who brought me to Israel after October 7th and did such a spectacular job of allowing me to learn. Again, not a fun vacation trip, but something that was so invaluable in current events. And then this was like, hey, we need more perspective on when these types of hatreds can spin fully out of control and then be weaponized against millions of people. What does that look like? And walking through those camps, a few of them in particular, I still almost get chills when I think about it. And I think I will hold some of those memories and some of those lessons with me for as long as I live.
And it was very interesting, Emily, because the trip started out kind of softly. You and Mary Catherine and I were the first three people to arrive. So they took us on a very beautiful tour of the zoo in Warsaw, which was the setting for the zookeeper's wife. And we learned about the zookeeper and his wife who kept safe and kept alive hundreds of Jews from the Warsaw ghettos at the beginning of the invasion of Poland from 1939 until the end of the war. And that was kind of a nice way to start it, which we thought it was heavy being in this place. And then they took us to a Jewish cemetery. We thought that was heavy, but then the trip descended into something that was heavy and meaningful all at the same time. How did it unravel for you, and what stood out for you?
That was such a great articulation of what was sort of an on-ramp. And I'm so grateful to Daniel and Sarah and Yuri and Natanya for being so mindful of the absolute horrors that, first of all, the Jewish population didn't have the luxury of being led into slowly, right? The catastrophe and the horrors of realities is something that they weren't able to in any way eject or soften, but that we got that luxury of softening the approach into what was a full 4 days immersed in this. And they spoke about that it lends itself toward greater impact so that there isn't a shock and a fatigue that sort of serves to then block out the really important messages and details that we're learning. And even that first day, as we walked around the Warsaw Cemetery, which is part of the Jewish ghetto, the largest ghetto at that time, and with Daniel sharing about his grandparents who perished on the sidewalk, both bodies found at the age of 85 after being rationed to less than 200 calories per day. In one sentence, in one family anecdote, just seared the horrors and sort of the introduction of then what became these 4 days. And at the end, we, after going through Madonic, I mean, we went through 2 gas chambers that were used. And I don't think I can ever have the words to describe the feeling and the heaviness in either. And I'll say that I think in Auschwitz, the most impactful moments were those in places where photography was not allowed, recording not allowed, and the visual horrors of what we saw there will sit with me forever. The 40 to 50,000 heads of hair that we were looking at behind glass with no warning other than a turnaround and to see the shock of that. It just underscores the importance of continuing to be allies and to fight anti-Semitism so that nothing like this happens again.
Yeah, and that was what was so present about what we were seeing. It wasn't just like a historical trip to a place that's like a museum, because Auschwitz has been curated into a really phenomenal and sort of a minimalist museum, because everything you encounter at Auschwitz, it cuts right through you with few words, few descriptions, but you were able to see, for example, you walk into a room and this is one of the things that really struck me. There were a couple things there, and I want to talk to you about the second, was in a darkly lit room, on the walls are broadcast home movies of lives of people before 1939. And you realize those are the same kind of home movies we all would have had with all of our families. Those are the lives that they were living that they couldn't have imagined would have been interrupted in the way that they were when we went to Auschwitz. Another one where I was very overcome was when we were walking through the various rooms with all of the personal possessions that were ripped away from people, including, there was a set of baby clothes. And, I was with you and Adam, and I really choked up because, like, as much as you love and care for your baby, imagine what people were going through and the stories that we heard about, because they found out very quickly when they got to Auschwitz and Birkenau that the healthy people who were able to work and do slave labor were separated immediately from the young and the old and the weak, who were immediately sent to the gas chamber. And moms figured that out, and they were trying to hide their children in their garments so the Nazis wouldn't take them.
I mean, it's just unspeakable, and yet it's right in front of your face. And one thing, those home movies that you brought up have stuck with me too, because they were so happy.
Yes.
So normal. Those were people, Jewish families, thriving in Europe just a few years before the whole thing went down a very dark, deadly path. They did not anticipate it, never could have. It developed quickly. And the word genocide gets thrown around a lot. It gets abused horribly, especially these days. We've been seeing that weaponized against the Jewish state in this completely evil, inaccurate way. One of the stats, because there are so many numbers, of course, on a trip like this. In Poland, before World War II, there were 3.1, 3.3 million Jewish people living in Poland. Today, Jews in Poland number in the tens of thousands.
Yeah, that was something that really struck me, because the towns that we went to, whether it was Tikucin or I know I'm going to get the name
Lublin.
wrong. Osterich, like it was the Polish name for Auschwitz. Auschwitz is the Germanized version. They had one person working in the synagogue, and they couldn't call it a synagogue because a synagogue requires a community that requires a minimum of 2 people. So, that's what has happened culturally, the decimation of the Jewish community. But then, it's like we see what's happening today. So we went to the death pits outside of Tikucin. We went to Treblinka and saw the first rudimentary extermination camp that had no barracks. That was just a place where Jews were shoved into cattle cars. The train pulled up and they were gassed slowly and painfully over up to a number of days. And then we went
to... immediately.
Yes, I mean, that was it.
That was it.
They were sent to their death immediately as the Nazi soldiers were laughing at them and making jokes and, calling the incineration process the grill in front of them. And then we went to
900,000 of them.
In one spot in Treblinka. Yeah. And that's what was, to me, I was very emotional at the death pits and at Treblinka, because you start to feel the gravity of that number of souls separated from their bodies against their will. And that's the physical sensation that is so hard to process. And you experienced that as well.
Yeah. And I say in Tiquichin, I think what was so visceral to experience in that small village, notable because the synagogue still remains and is still standing, wasn't destroyed, albeit 0 worshipers there. We learned the story of the morning that all of the Jews were told to meet in the square and then put on lorries and bussed essentially a couple kilometers outside of the village to 3 horrific death pits. And when we drove there, we were let off, at the outside of the entrance of the forest, and we walked a good, I don't know, half mile or so to get there. And the entire time, walking and knowing that we were walking in the footsteps of those thousands and thousands of Jews who had walked there to their death, to be shot and for the atrocities, the manners of death, the violence upon children especially, and then to stand at the foot of all 3 of those death pits and to smell the air and to hear the few birds and to see the sunlight and to feel the gravity, the horrors and the heaviness there. That was a very incredible experience, I think, for me. That, by the way, was the first morning that we were there, the first morning of the official tour after the day that we had with the girls. That was our introduction. And the juxtaposition of the gorgeous natural beauty with the hellscape horror and the anguish seeped into those areas there. That was an interesting overlay.
Don't go anywhere. More Kennedy Saves the World right after this.
And the people who were able to escape the death pits, which was, what they called the Holocaust by bullets. That was the first phase of the Holocaust, when they decided that they were going to murder people instead of just putting them into ghettos. That was one of the first places they took them. And people who escaped, the Nazis would find them. They had technology. They had dogs, and they would sick dogs on people and send them into the forest. But what I want to ask you about is New York City just had an anti-Zionist candidate for mayor win the Democrat primary. And he has rationalized the term global intifada, saying that, oh no, that's a term that the Holocaust Museum used. They translated that into Arabic. It just means struggle. But if you ask Jews, they will say, no, if you're calling for a global intifada, you are calling for, best case scenario, violence against Jews. So what does it mean? Like, what kind of world are we living in when the potential mayor of the biggest city in the country has a real problem with a city that houses the most Jews outside of Israel?
Yep. It's a really difficult thing to think about. And I think another backdrop to the conversation is when we all landed, or at least I'll speak for half the group, when we landed in Europe that morning, and so we flew through Germany. So we landed in Germany on our way to Poland to see these horrors carried out by the Nazi regime. I turned on my phone, got connected to Wi-Fi in Frankfurt, and learned that 2 people had been shot dead in Washington, D.C., in our capital city, by someone screaming so-called pro-Palestine slogans, these Hamas slogans. He went to a Jewish museum in D.C. and killed 2 people, and did so proudly and openly for obvious reasons. And
to fulfill the global intifada.
That is globalizing the intifada.
Yeah.
And to see that slogan then either justified or remade or sanitized by this person who's running for mayor here in New York City, to get smacked down, by the way, by the Holocaust Museum, who he dragged into this. They were like, how dare you bring us into this and try to use us as a shield? And then for him to win the primary, at least, of the dominant major party in this city, it's very worrisome. On the other hand, because we're talking about current events, and it's impossible not to learn the lessons of history and not start thinking about current events, one of my biggest fears, I remember specifically at Auschwitz, there was a quote, and I'm not going to get the quote exactly right, but it was written on the wall by a Jewish scholar who said something to the effect of, because it has already happened, it can happen again. The evidence of the past is proof of potential future, was what his message was. And I remember in that moment sitting there with my own thoughts and thinking, the closest thing we have on the horizon to that, I think, in the world, is nuclear weapons in the hands of Iran.
Yeah.
I thought that then.
I mean, who have said they want the extermination of the Jewish state. Like,
And
they want
as we've
Israel
learned,
to be obliterated.
When people who say out loud that they want to kill as many Jews as possible say that, you have to believe them.
Yes.
That's one of the lessons of history. And I remember having that fear. And I understood viscerally why the Israeli government, for example, it's not just words, this is unacceptable, it can never happen. It is existential to them. So when President Trump and the Israelis coordinated and did what they did just recently in Iran, to me it wasn't any sort of glee or anything like that. It was almost relief. Like, thank God there are some people taking this seriously to try to prevent what would be a nuclear version of the Holocaust.
Yes, which, would be quicker, more efficient, using modern day technology to carry out, this ancestral murderous grudge. So, but when we spent our last night in Krakow, we were sitting there at sunset enjoying an Aperol Spritz, and we were discussing the trip, talking about the things that we had learned that we had never known, and the way seeing things firsthand is its own history lesson, because you learn things that you never could in a lecture or in a book. And, we were just remarking at how much we saw and how much we learned, and then what happened right in front of us.
A demonstration of an anti-Semitic, pro-Hamas, pro-Palestine, pro-violence against Jews demonstration.
Yes.
Not a few dozen kilometers away from Auschwitz, from those lessons, from those horrors and the memory that has saturated the land. And you and I stood up and we were shouting, and it was freeing, frankly, to be able to do that and to respond when so often here it's difficult to do that with the threat of violence everywhere. And I'll never forget that people in the cafe started clapping and cheering for the demonstrators. And we turned on them too. I was horrified. And it underscores to me that, frankly, under the prior administration especially, that one of the stated goals of Hamas and the Islamic Republic is the global condemnation of Israel and of Jews, and that they have succeeded in that. And that somewhere along the line, it was okay and fomented that anti-Israel and anti-Semitism is a part of the fabric of the culture. And it shocks me every day, all day, why that wasn't how it's been allowed to get this far.
Yes.
And to your point about if it's happened before, which we saw in the quote at Auschwitz, if it's happened before, it can happen again. If those demonstrations are happening around the corner from Auschwitz, God help us.
Yeah.
But it also gives the hope that during World War II and prior to World War II, there was no Jewish state, let alone one that was armed to the teeth. And now there is one. And it is one of the most extraordinary places in the world. Their military capabilities, their intelligence capabilities, what they have pulled off against their enemies. Thank God the state of Israel exists, because now you have a real force backed by the United States, God willing forever, but a force willing to say, never again isn't a slogan, never again is our mission.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of people who would love for everyone to forget the histories of...
No, they want again.
Yes.
They want again.
Yeah, they want again to be now.
Yeah.
And that's terrifying, but it also goes to show why the Maccabee Foundation does, the task force rather, why they send journalists on trips like this. And it wasn't propaganda. These were secular people who were teaching us about history that they have studied for decades. And, we're all better off for it. We all do our best to study history and to inform the audiences that we speak to every day. And I think that this was the most useful thing that I have encountered. And that is thanks to you and the friendships that you have made. And next time you want to get us all together and, I don't know, go to Hawaii,
Yeah,
go
let's
to
do
Bali,
something else.
and really discuss in a different context.
Yes, I support that entirely, and I will put the planning on you for that, and maybe the financing, and then you just tell me where.
But I do have to say that it was heavy, it was powerful, it was so deeply impactful in ways that I didn't know, but we still managed to have fun.
We did.
Yeah, we did.
And I will always, forever, have a great appreciation for gas station champagne.
It's delicious, actually. It's delicious.
And strawberry Milka bars. They bring people together. Like, there were ways that we really need to release the stress.
Yeah, it's like you've been at a death camp all day. Would you like some chocolate and bad champagne? You're like, I would.
I would very much.
That
Again.
actually sounds divine.
Jack Daniels and Coke in a can. Let's have it. All right. Thank you both so much. I love you guys so much.
I love
Thank
you.
you.
You
Same.
really are. I'm
you,
so
guys.
lucky to have been on this journey with you and to be able to talk about it.
Yeah. And to share it. I think that's the important part.
Amen.
Yes. Amen.
All right.
Thank
This
you.
has been Kennedy Saves the World. We're doing our best to save it, along with Emily Compagno and Guy Benson. I'm Kennedy.
Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.
Oh, go ahead and leave me a review while you're there. I'd love to hear what you have to say. You've been listening to Kennedy Saves the World on the Fox News Podcast Network.